Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation Cracks. Colonel Derek Morrison had built his life on three unshakable pillars: duty, honor, and family. At 42, he commanded the respect of every soldier under him at Fort Braxton, his reputation forged through 3 tours in Afghanistan and a silver star that hung quietly in his study. His angular face bore the weathered lines of a man who had seen the worst humanity could offer, yet his steel-gray eyes still held the calculating sharpness that had kept his unit alive through countless operations. Derek's wife Linda had been his anchor for 18 years. They'd met when she was a young Army nurse, and he was a fresh-faced lieutenant with more ambition than sense. She'd patched him up after an IED blast in Iraq, and he'd fallen for her gentle touch and unwavering composure under pressure. Now 38, Linda had left military service to focus on raising their 16-year-old twins, Amy and Tyler, while Derek climbed the ranks. The Morrison household on Magnolia Drive was the picture of military precision mixed with domestic warmth. Linda maintained the home with the same efficiency she'd once brought to field hospitals, while the twins excelled in their studies and athletics. Derek's study was his sanctuary: maps, commendations, and family photos creating a shrine to his dual devotions of country and family. But lately, Derek had noticed subtle changes. Linda's phone would buzz with messages she'd quickly dismiss. She'd started jogging again, claiming she needed to get back in shape, though Derek had always found her beautiful. Most telling were the small inconsistencies, claiming to be at the grocery store when he could hear traffic in the background during their calls, or finding unfamiliar cologne scent on her gym clothes. Derek's instincts, honed by years of reading enemy movements and detecting threats, began whispering warnings he didn't want to hear. He'd survived ambushes and betrayals in war zones by trusting those instincts, but applying them to his marriage felt like a violation of everything sacred. The first concrete evidence came through an unexpected source. Major Tony Riggs, Derek's longtime friend and intelligence officer, approached him after a routine briefing with an uncomfortable expression. "Stone," Tony said, using Derek's nickname earned from his unshakable demeanor under fire, "we need to talk." Privately, in Derek's office, Tony placed a manila folder on the desk. "Our surveillance equipment picked this up during a routine security sweep of the officers' quarters." Blake Hoffman's apartment. Derek's jaw tightened as he opened the folder. Captain Blake Hoffman was one of his most trusted officers, young, ambitious, and blessed with natural leadership qualities that reminded Derek of his younger self. The photos inside the folder shattered Derek's world more effectively than any enemy artillery ever had. Linda and Blake in passionate embrace. Linda leaving Blake's apartment at dawn. Linda and Blake in civilian clothes at a restaurant Derek had never taken her to, looking at each other with the intensity of new lovers. "How long?" Derek's voice was steady, betraying none of the rage building inside him. "Based on what we've documented, at least 3 months. "Stone, I'm sorry. I debated whether to." "You did right, Tony." Derek closed the folder with mechanical precision. "Any other officers involved in this surveillance?" "Just me." I kept it compartmentalized, knowing the sensitivity. Derek nodded, his mind already shifting into tactical mode. "I need you to continue monitoring, but expand the scope. I want to know everything: communications, movements, associates, financial transactions. Everything." "Derek, what are you planning?" For the first time in their 20-year friendship, Tony saw something in Derek's eyes that made him unconsciously step back. It was the same cold calculation Derek had shown before particularly ruthless operations overseas, but magnified and personalized in a way that was genuinely frightening. "I'm going to gather intelligence," Derek said quietly. "When I move, I want to be sure I destroy everything that threatens what I've built. Complete and total victory, Tony. Nothing less." That evening, Derek sat in his study, the folder's contents spread before him like a battle plan. He could hear Linda in the kitchen, humming while she prepared dinner, and the twins upstairs arguing over homework. The normalcy felt like a cruel joke, but Derek's expression remained impassive. He opened his laptop and began typing, starting with a detailed timeline of Linda's behavioral changes. Next, he pulled Blake's personnel file, studying the young officer's background, family, ambitions, and weaknesses. Derek had trained himself to find the pressure points in any adversary, and now he applied that skill to the 2 people who had destroyed his faith in loyalty. The phone rang, interrupting his analysis. Linda's voice drifted from the kitchen. Derek? It's for you. General Crawford. Derek closed the laptop and picked up the extension in his study. General Robert Crawford was his commanding officer and mentor, a man Derek respected above all others in the military hierarchy. Stone, we need to discuss the Henderson investigation. Can you come in early tomorrow? The Henderson investigation involved allegations of unauthorized weapons sales from the base armory. Derek had been assigned to lead the inquiry, a responsibility that demonstrated Crawford's trust in his integrity and investigative skills. Of course, sir. 0600. Make it 0530. This is getting more complicated, and I need your assessment before the Pentagon starts asking questions. After hanging up, Derek returned to his research. He pulled up Blake's assignment history and noticed something interesting. Blake had been transferred to Fort Braxton 8 months ago, specifically requesting assignment to Derek's command. The timing aligned suspiciously with when Linda had started her fitness routine. Derek's methodical nature had always been his strength in military operations, and now he applied it to his personal war. He created encrypted files for each target, began monitoring their communications through legitimate military intelligence resources, and started building profiles of their associates and potential allies. By midnight, Derek had compiled a comprehensive dossier on his enemies. Linda's sister Rebecca lived 2 states away and had been divorced 3 times, a potential ally if properly motivated. Blake's father was a retired colonel with a reputation for old-school military values who would be devastated by his son's conduct. The twins' loyalty remained unresolved, but Derek suspected Linda had been poisoning them against him gradually. As he prepared for bed, Derek caught sight of himself in the bathroom mirror. His face showed no trace of the emotional devastation he'd experienced earlier. Instead, he saw the same cold, determined expression he'd worn before successful missions in hostile territory. Linda was already asleep when he slipped into bed beside her. For a moment, he studied her peaceful face in the moonlight filtering through their curtains. She'd shared his bed for 18 years, borne his children, and sworn to love him until death. Now she was just another enemy combatant to be neutralized. Derek closed his eyes and began planning her destruction. Chapter 2. The Art of War. Derek arrived at General Crawford's office at 0530 sharp, finding his commanding officer already deep in paperwork with a coffee mug that suggested he'd been there for hours. Crawford looked up from a stack of files, his weathered face showing the strain of command at the highest levels. Stone, close the door and have a seat. What I'm about to discuss doesn't leave this room. Derek settled into the chair across from Crawford's desk, noting the unusual security precautions. In their 12-year working relationship, Crawford had never been this secretive about routine investigations. The Henderson situation isn't what we initially thought, Crawford began, sliding a classified folder across the desk. Internal Affairs believes we have a leak in the command structure. Someone with high-level access has been feeding information to parties unknown. Derek opened the folder and studied the contents. Detailed records showed discrepancies in weapons tracking, ammunition counts, and equipment manifests that went back 6 months. The irregularities were subtle but consistent, suggesting someone with intimate knowledge of military inventory procedures. Sir, the pattern suggests. Someone in the upper command structure, Crawford finished grimly. Stone, I'm putting you in charge of a special investigation. You'll have access to all personnel files, communication records, and financial information for anyone with clearance level 7 or above. Derek's mind raced as he processed the implications. Level 7 clearance included all field-grade officers, including Blake Hoffman. More importantly, it gave Derek legitimate access to investigate his wife's lover under the cover of official duties. Who else knows about this expanded investigation? Just you, me, and Admiral Reeves at the Pentagon. We're keeping this compartmentalized until we identify the leak. Crawford leaned forward, his expression serious. Stone, I'm trusting you with this because your reputation for thoroughness and integrity is unquestioned. Find me the traitor. Derek nodded, accepting the folder. I'll need a small team of investigators I can trust completely. Approved. Use whoever you need, but keep the circle tight. As Derek left Crawford's office, he felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with launching a complex operation. The official investigation would provide perfect cover for his personal vendetta, and he could use military resources to destroy Blake's career while gathering intelligence on Linda's activities. His first stop was Major Tony Riggs' office in the intelligence division. Tony looked up as Derek entered, immediately recognizing the expression on his friend's face. "What do you need, Stone?" Derek closed the door and activated the white noise generator used for sensitive discussions. "I need everything you can find on Captain Blake Hoffman. Financial records, communication logs, personal associations, family background, everything." "This is about yesterday's photos?" "Partially. I've also been assigned to investigate a security leak, and Hoffman has the necessary clearance level to be involved." Derek handed Tony a copy of the official investigation orders. "This is now a priority assignment with General Crawford's direct authorization." Tony studied the documents, whistling softly. "This is serious business, Derek. If there's really a leak at this level, then we'll find it. But I want to start with Hoffman's records. Something about his transfer here doesn't sit right with me." Over the next 4 hours, Derek and Tony methodically dissected Blake Hoffman's military career. What they discovered painted a disturbing picture of ambition unchecked by principles. Blake had requested transfers to bases where senior officers' wives had later filed for divorce. His performance reviews consistently mentioned his interpersonal skills and ability to connect with families, but reading between the lines suggested a pattern of inappropriate relationships. "Look at this." Tony pointed to a notation in Blake's file from Fort Campbell. "Counseling session for boundary issues with the dependents of senior staff. The commanding officer there recommended he be transferred to a position with less family interaction." Derek studied the entry, his anger crystallizing into cold hatred. Blake wasn't just having an affair with Linda. He was a predator who specifically targeted military wives whose husbands were frequently deployed. Any indication he's done this before successfully? 2 bases, 2 divorces among senior officers' wives within 6 months of his arrival. In both cases, the women left with substantial alimony and custody arrangements that favored them heavily. Derek's strategic mind began connecting patterns. "Pull the financial records on those cases. I want to know if there was any external funding for the wives' legal proceedings." While Tony worked, Derek called Linda to check on her afternoon plans. She mentioned meeting her book club, but Derek's surveillance had shown no such group existed. Instead, she would likely be meeting Blake for another rendezvous. "Tony, I need real-time surveillance on both targets. Official surveillance as part of the security investigation." "Derek, if this is just about the affair, it's about more than that now." Derek's voice carried the authority that had commanded respect in the most dangerous situations. "Blake Hoffman is a security risk and potentially involved in a larger operation targeting military families. Linda may be compromised as well." Tony nodded, accepting the operational justification. "I'll set up surveillance teams immediately." That evening, Derek returned home to find the twins unusually quiet during dinner. Linda chattered about her day, mentioning details about the book club meeting that Derek knew were fabricated. But it was Amy and Tyler's behavior that truly alarmed him. They seemed nervous, avoiding eye contact, and speaking only when directly addressed. After dinner, Derek found Tyler in the garage, ostensibly working on a model airplane, but clearly waiting for privacy. "Dad, can we talk?" Derek closed the garage door, creating a private space. "What's on your mind?" "Mom's been different lately. She's been asking me and Amy weird questions about you. Like, what you do at work, who you talk to, if you ever seem suspicious about anything." Derek's blood chilled as he realized the scope of the conspiracy. "What kind of questions specifically?" "She wanted to know if you've been working late more often, if you've seemed worried about anything, if you've mentioned any problems with other officers." Tyler's voice dropped to a whisper. "Dad, she made us promise not to tell you about the questions. She said it was important for your security clearance." Derek knelt to his son's eye level, placing firm hands on the boy's shoulders. "Tyler, I need you to listen carefully. Don't let your mother know we had this conversation. Continue answering her questions, but I want you to tell me exactly what she asks. Can you do that?" Tyler nodded, though his eyes showed confusion and fear. "Dad, are you and Mom getting divorced?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire. Derek studied his son's face, seeing Linda's eyes but his own stubborn jawline. In that moment, he realized that the twins might be collateral damage in the war that was coming. "I don't know yet, son. But whatever happens, I need you to remember that I love you and Amy more than anything in this world." That night, Derek sat in his study and updated his files with the new intelligence. Linda wasn't just having an affair. She was actively gathering information about his work and using their children as unwitting assets. The pattern suggested Blake was running a sophisticated operation to compromise senior military officers through their families. Derek opened a secure communication channel and composed a message to Admiral Reeves at the Pentagon. If his suspicions were correct, Blake Hoffman represented a much larger security threat than simple adultery. The operation was designed to identify and exploit weaknesses in military command structure, potentially for foreign intelligence purposes. As he prepared the message, Derek's phone buzzed with a text from Linda. "Working late again? You've been so distant lately. I miss my husband." Derek stared at the message, recognizing it as both manipulation and intelligence gathering. Linda was probing to determine if he suspected anything while simultaneously establishing a narrative of him being an absent, disconnected husband. He typed back, "Just catching up on paperwork. Home soon. Love you." But as he sent the message, Derek was already planning the total destruction of everyone who had betrayed him. The military had taught him that decisive action and overwhelming force were the keys to victory. In this war, he would show no mercy and accept no surrender. The game had changed from personal revenge to national security, giving Derek unlimited resources and legal justification for what he was about to do to his enemies. Chapter 3: The Trap Springs. Derek's investigation had been running for 2 weeks when Major Riggs burst into his office with an expression of barely contained excitement. The surveillance teams had been monitoring Blake and Linda's activities while Derek meticulously built his case through official channels. "Stone, you need to see this immediately," Tony said, closing the door and activating the security measures. "We hit the jackpot." Derek looked up from the financial records he'd been analyzing. "What did you find?" Tony placed a stack of intercepted communications on Derek's desk. "Blake isn't just seducing military wives. He's running a full-scale intelligence operation. Look at these encrypted messages we decoded from his personal laptop." Derek studied the documents, his expression growing darker with each page. Blake had been in contact with a private intelligence firm called Strategic Information Solutions, feeding them detailed reports on military personnel, operational schedules, and base security procedures. The firm had clients in several countries with interests that ran counter to American military operations. "Linda," Derek asked quietly. "She's been his primary source for information about your activities, security clearances, and access to classified materials. Look at message thread 47. Derek found the relevant communication and felt his blood turn to ice water. Linda had provided Blake with copies of Derek's security briefings, schedules of classified meetings, and detailed information about personnel under his command. She'd been systematically betraying not just her marriage, but her country. The twins. Unwitting assets. Linda's been using their casual conversations with you to extract operational intelligence. Amy mentioned your late-night work on the Henderson investigation 3 days before we made it public knowledge." Derek leaned back in his chair, processing the magnitude of the betrayal. His wife had turned their children into intelligence gatherers without their knowledge, using their love for their father as a weapon against him and national security. "Tony, I want you to coordinate with Admiral Reeves immediately. This goes to the Pentagon today. But first, I need you to arrange something for me." "What do you need?" Derek's voice dropped to the cold, measured tone that had preceded his most ruthless operations overseas. "I want Blake and Linda to believe they've succeeded in neutralizing me as a threat. Set up a scenario where I'm arrested on false charges, something that would remove me from the base and discredit me completely." Tony stared at his friend, recognizing the deadly calculation behind Derek's request. "What are you planning?" "Total warfare, Tony. By tomorrow morning, I want them to think they've won. Then I'm going to destroy them so completely that they'll wish they'd never been born." The next morning, Derek followed his normal routine. He kissed Linda goodbye, reminded the twins about their after-school activities, and drove to base for what appeared to be another routine day. But he'd spent the previous evening making final preparations for the operation that would end his old life and begin something darker. At 0600 hours, during morning reveille, military police surrounded Derek in front of his entire command. The scene was carefully orchestrated theater, designed to appear authentic while protecting Derek's true investigation. Colonel Morrison, you're under arrest for unauthorized disclosure of classified information and conspiracy to commit treason, announced Captain Rodriguez, the lead MP who was part of Derek's inner circle. Derek allowed himself to be handcuffed without resistance, maintaining the stoic expression expected of a military officer facing disgrace. As the MPs led him away, he could see the shock and confusion on his subordinates' faces. The arrest would be base-wide news within an hour. At the military police station, Derek was processed and placed in a holding cell while maintaining his cover. Captain Rodriguez approached after ensuring they were alone. "Sir, your wife and children are being brought in for questioning. Admiral Reeves' people are monitoring from D.C. Everything is proceeding according to your plan." Derek nodded, settling onto the narrow bench in his cell. "What about Blake? He's been placed in temporary command of your unit, effective immediately." General Crawford played his part perfectly. He seems genuinely outraged by your alleged betrayal. 20 minutes later, Linda arrived at the station with Amy and Tyler. Derek could hear her voice echoing through the corridors as she spoke with the investigating officers. "I can't believe this is happening," Linda said, her tone perfectly modulated to suggest shock and betrayal. "Derek has been acting so strangely lately. Secretive, paranoid. I found documents in his study that he told me were routine paperwork, but now I realize they must have been classified materials." Derek listened as his wife systematically destroyed his reputation, using intimate knowledge of his behavior and access to his personal space to construct a believable narrative of guilt. She described late-night phone calls he'd never made, suspicious meetings that never occurred, and financial irregularities that she'd fabricated with Blake's help. The twins corroborated her story, repeating carefully coached responses about their father's recent behavior. Amy mentioned finding weird codes in Derek's handwriting, while Tyler described conversations where their father had seemed nervous about work stuff. When the MP asked Derek if he wanted to make his one phone call, Derek looked up from the bench where he'd been sitting in apparent defeat. "Who are you calling?" the MP asked. Derek dialed a number from memory, his expression unreadable. "It's none of your business." The call connected to Admiral Reeves' secure line at the Pentagon. "Stone here. Execute Phase 2. An hour later, the military police station erupted in activity as Secretary of Defense Patricia Hawkins arrived with a convoy of black SUVs and federal agents. General Crawford received a direct call from the Pentagon ordering Derek's immediate release, and the investigation was classified at the highest levels of national security. Secretary Hawkins personally entered the station and shouted at the MPs, "Release him immediately." But then she turned to the commanding officer with an expression of cold fury. "Detain Linda Morrison and Captain Blake Hoffman for questioning in a matter of national security. They are not to contact anyone or leave federal custody." Derek emerged from his cell as Linda and Blake were being placed in handcuffs. Linda's face showed complete confusion and terror as she realized the trap had been sprung around her instead of her husband. "Derek, what's happening? I don't understand." Linda's voice cracked as federal agents read her rights. Derek looked at his wife with the same expression he'd shown enemy combatants who had betrayed truces or harmed civilians. "You understand perfectly, Linda. You've been selling state secrets to foreign agents and using our children as intelligence assets. Did you think I wouldn't find out?" Blake struggled against his restraints as the full scope of Derek's counter-operation became clear. "You son of a bitch. You planned this whole thing." "I plan to protect my country from traitors," Derek replied calmly. "The fact that those traitors happen to be my wife and one of my officers just makes it personal." As Linda and Blake were loaded into separate vehicles for transport to federal detention facilities, Derek turned to address Amy and Tyler, who stood nearby in shock. Their faces showed a mixture of confusion, fear, and dawning realization that their comfortable world had just been destroyed. "Dad, what's going to happen to Mom?" Amy asked, tears streaming down her face. Derek studied his daughter's expression, searching for any sign that she had knowingly participated in Linda's betrayal. What he saw was genuine confusion and fear, confirming that the twins had been manipulated rather than willing participants. "Your mother is going to federal prison for treason, Amy. Blake Hoffman will likely face the same charges." Derek's voice was gentle but unyielding. "You and Tyler will continue to live with me, and we'll rebuild our family without the people who betrayed us." But as Derek looked at his children, he realized that Linda's manipulation had planted seeds of doubt about their father that might never fully disappear. The twins had been used as weapons against him, and while they were victims rather than perpetrators, Derek's faith and family loyalty had been shattered beyond repair. The war was far from over. It was just beginning. Chapter 4. The Reckoning Begins. 3 months after the arrests, Derek sat in his study reviewing the federal prosecutor's case files. Linda and Blake were being held in separate federal facilities awaiting trial, and Derek had been cleared of all charges while receiving commendations for uncovering the intelligence operation. But the legal proceedings were only the beginning of his methodical destruction of everyone who had betrayed him. The twins had been struggling since their mother's arrest. Amy had become withdrawn and sullen, while Tyler alternated between anger and desperate attempts to maintain normalcy. Both blamed Derek for destroying their family, unable to comprehend that Linda's betrayal had made the destruction inevitable. Derek had arranged for family counseling, but he attended the sessions as an observer rather than a participant. Dr. Margaret Kellerman, their therapist, had quickly identified the core issue. The children's loyalty was split between their imprisoned mother and their father, who had orchestrated her downfall. Amy, Tyler, I know this is difficult, Dr. Kellerman said during one session. But you need to understand that your father was protecting both his family and his country when he uncovered your mother's activities. He could have warned her. Amy shot back, glaring at Derek. He could have given her a chance to stop instead of setting up this elaborate trap. Derek's expression remained impassive as he studied his daughter. At 16, Amy possessed Linda's emotional intelligence but lacked the wisdom to understand the stakes involved. Would you have preferred that I allowed your mother to continue committing treason? I would have preferred that you tried to save your marriage instead of destroying it, Amy replied with teenage defiance. Tyler remained silent during these exchanges, but Derek could see the boy's internal struggle. Tyler understood the severity of Linda's crimes intellectually, but emotionally he still saw Derek as the aggressor who had torn their family apart. After the session, Derek drove the twins home through the autumn evening. The leaves were changing colors, and the base housing area looked deceptively peaceful. But Derek knew that behind the facade of normalcy, other families were dealing with their own secrets and betrayals. Dad, Tyler said quietly from the back seat. What's going to happen when Mom goes to trial? Derek glanced at his son in the rearview mirror. She'll be convicted and sentenced to federal prison. Blake will likely receive a similar sentence. Their choice to commit treason has consequences. But she's still our mom, Amy protested from the passenger seat. She stopped being your mother when she decided to use you as intelligence assets against your own father, Derek replied coldly. She put both of you at risk and betrayed everything this family was supposed to represent. The conversation ended in tense silence, but Derek could feel the resentment radiating from his children. Linda's final manipulation was proving to be her most effective. She had poisoned their relationship with their father even from prison. That evening, Derek received a call from his attorney, Colonel Samuel Wright, who was handling the family's legal affairs. Wright had been Derek's roommate at West Point and understood the complexities of military justice. Derek, I've reviewed the plea negotiations. Linda's attorney is pushing for a deal that would reduce her sentence in exchange for full cooperation with the intelligence investigation. Derek's grip tightened on the phone. What kind of deal? 8 years instead of 25. She'd be eligible for parole in 5 with good behavior. In exchange, she provides detailed information about Blake's network and any other compromised military families. Absolutely not, Derek said immediately. Linda doesn't get to bargain her way out of the consequences of treason. Derek, be realistic. She has information the government needs, and the prosecutors are willing to make a deal. You can't control every aspect of this process. Derek was quiet for a long moment, his mind working through the implications. Sam, I want you to arrange a meeting with Linda. I need to speak with her directly. I don't think that's advisable. The emotional component. This isn't emotional, Sam. This is strategic. Set up the meeting. 2 days later, Derek sat across from Linda in the visitor's room at the Federal Detention Center. She looked older than her 38 years, the stress of imprisonment showing in the lines around her eyes and the gray threads in her hair. But her intelligence remained sharp, and Derek could see her calculating how to use this meeting to her advantage. You look well, Derek, Linda said, attempting to project warmth. How are Amy and Tyler handling everything? They're struggling with the fact that their mother is a traitor, Derek replied without emotion. But they'll adapt. Children are resilient. Linda's composure cracked slightly. I never wanted them to be hurt by this. Everything I did was to protect this family. Derek leaned forward, his voice dropping to the quiet intensity that had preceded his most decisive military actions. You sold classified information to foreign agents and used our children as intelligence assets. Don't insult my intelligence by claiming it was for family protection. Blake convinced me that you were becoming a security risk. He said your paranoia and obsession with work were making you unstable. I thought I was helping prevent you from doing something that would destroy your career. Derek studied his wife's face, recognizing the lies mixed with self-deception. Linda, I'm going to explain something to you very clearly. You have two choices: plead guilty to all charges and accept whatever sentence the court imposes, or continue with this plea negotiation and discover exactly how ruthless I can be when people threaten my family. What do you mean? Derek's smile was colder than anything Linda had ever seen from him. I mean that I've spent the last 3 months investigating every aspect of your relationship with Blake. I know about the offshore accounts he set up for you. I know about the safety deposit box in Richmond with the cash payments. I know about the apartment you rented under an assumed name for your meetings. Linda's face went white as Derek continued. Most importantly, I know about the backup plan you and Blake developed in case this operation was discovered. The false identities, the emergency funds, the extraction route through Canada. All of it. How could you possibly? Because I'm very good at my job, Linda. And now I'm going to use everything I've learned to ensure that you and Blake face the maximum possible consequences for your betrayal. Derek stood to leave, but paused at the door. The twins blame me for destroying our family. They think I'm the villain in this story because you've manipulated them so effectively. But I want you to understand something. Their hatred for me is nothing compared to what I feel for you right now. As Derek walked away, Linda called after him desperately. Derek, please. Think about Amy and Tyler. They need their mother. Derek stopped and turned back one final time. They needed a mother who wouldn't commit treason and use them as weapons against their father. You made your choice, Linda. Now live with the consequences. The meeting confirmed what Derek had suspected. Linda and Blake had been planning to disappear if their operation was discovered, abandoning the twins to face the aftermath alone. The knowledge crystallized Derek's resolve to show no mercy to anyone who had betrayed his family. Over the following weeks, Derek methodically fed information to the prosecution that eliminated any possibility of plea negotiations. Financial records, communications intercepts, and evidence of additional security breaches painted a picture of a sophisticated operation that went far beyond simple adultery. Blake's father, retired Colonel Martin Hoffman, visited Derek to plead for leniency for his son. The meeting took place in Derek's study, surrounded by commendations and family photos that served as reminders of everything Blake had betrayed. Derek, I know what Blake did was inexcusable, the older man said, his voice heavy with shame. But he's still my son. Isn't there some way to resolve this without destroying his entire life? Derek poured 2 glasses of bourbon and handed one to Colonel Hoffman. Martin, your son seduced my wife and convinced her to commit treason against her own country. He used my children as intelligence assets and planned to abandon them when the operation collapsed. What kind of resolution would you suggest? Maybe if he cooperated fully with the investigation. He is going to federal prison for a minimum of 20 years, Derek interrupted calmly. There will be no deals, no reduced sentences, and no early parole. Blake chose to destroy my family, and now I'm going to destroy his. Colonel Hoffman left the meeting understanding that Derek's mercy had been permanently exhausted. The man who had once been known for his fairness and compassion had been replaced by something harder and more ruthless. As winter approached, Derek prepared for the trials that would formally end his old life and confirm the beginning of something darker. But first, he had to deal with the final betrayal, the one that would come from his own children. Chapter 5: The Children's Choice. The federal courthouse in Richmond buzzed with media attention as Linda Morrison's treason trial began. Derek sat in the gallery wearing his dress uniform, a calculated display of military authority and patriotic loyalty. The twins sat beside him, their faces showing the strain of months spent torn between their parents. Lead prosecutor Sarah Chun delivered an opening statement that methodically outlined Linda's betrayal. Financial records showed payments totaling over $200,000 from Strategic Information Solutions. Communication intercepts revealed detailed intelligence about base security, personnel movements, and classified operational plans. Most damaging were the recorded conversations where Linda coached Amy and Tyler to extract information from their father. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Chun concluded, Linda Morrison didn't just betray her marriage vows. She betrayed her country, endangered national security, and used her own children as weapons against their father. This case represents treason at its most personal and devastating level. Linda's defense attorney, Marcus Webb, attempted to portray her as a manipulated victim of Blake's sophisticated seduction. He argued that Linda believed she was protecting her family from Derek's alleged mental instability and that Blake had convinced her the intelligence gathering was sanctioned by military authorities. Derek watched dispassionately as witnesses testified about Linda's activities. Major Riggs described the surveillance operation that had uncovered her betrayal. Financial experts detailed the offshore accounts and cash payments. Intelligence analysts explained how the compromised information had already been used to threaten American operations overseas. But the most devastating testimony came from Dr. Patricia Morse, a child psychologist who had reviewed recordings of Linda coaching the twins. Dr. Morse's analysis revealed a systematic campaign to manipulate Amy and Tyler's conversations with their father, turning routine family interactions into intelligence-gathering operations. The defendant used sophisticated psychological manipulation to turn these children against their father, Dr. Morse testified. She exploited their natural love and trust to extract classified information while making them believe they were protecting the family unit. Amy sat rigid beside Derek as recordings of her conversations with Linda played in the courtroom. The jury heard Linda carefully coaching her daughter to ask seemingly innocent questions about Derek's work schedule, security concerns, and interactions with other officers. "Did your father seem worried about anything at work today, honey?" Linda's voice asked on one recording. "He was talking on the phone about some investigation," 16-year-old Amy replied. "Something about missing weapons or equipment. That does sound concerning. Did he mention any names?" Derek felt Amy flinch beside him as her unwitting betrayal was exposed to the court. Tyler stared at his hands, his face flushed with shame as similar recordings revealed his own manipulation. When the prosecution rested, Webb called Linda to testify in her own defense. She took the stand wearing a conservative blue suit. Her appearance carefully managed to project vulnerability and remorse. "I loved my husband," Linda testified, tears streaming down her face. "But Blake convinced me that Derek was becoming dangerous. He showed me classified documents that suggested Derek was under investigation for security violations. I thought I was protecting my family by gathering information that could help Derek's career." Derek watched his wife's performance with clinical detachment. Linda was an accomplished manipulator, and her testimony was carefully crafted to exploit every possible avenue of sympathy. She portrayed herself as a concerned military wife caught between loyalty to her husband and fear for her family's safety. But Chin's cross-examination systematically destroyed Linda's credibility. Financial records showed she had been receiving payments before Blake claimed Derek was under investigation. Communication intercepts revealed her active participation in planning intelligence-gathering operations. Most damaging, Chun presented evidence of Linda's backup escape plan, including false identification documents and travel arrangements that would have left the twins behind. "Mrs. Morrison, this escape plan makes no provision for your children," Chin observed. "How does abandoning Amy and Tyler protect your family?" Linda's composure finally cracked as she realized her manipulation had been exposed. I thought Derek would take care of them. I thought they'd be safer with him than involved in this situation. So your plan was to commit treason, collect payment from foreign agents, and then abandon your children to face the consequences of your betrayal? No, that's not. I never intended. Derek watched Linda's destruction with satisfaction. She had built her defense on lies and manipulation, and now those lies were collapsing under the weight of evidence he had carefully compiled. The jury deliberated for 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges: conspiracy to commit treason, unauthorized disclosure of classified information, and conspiracy to defraud the United States. Linda's face went white as the verdicts were read, and she looked desperately toward Derek as if expecting him to intervene. Derek's expression remained impassive as the judge set sentencing for 2 weeks later. Linda would face a minimum of 25 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole for 15 years. Her betrayal had been total, and now her punishment would be equally comprehensive. As the court recessed, Amy and Tyler approached Derek in the hallway. Both twins appeared emotionally devastated by the trial's revelations, but Derek could see something else in their faces, a hardening of their attitudes toward him. "Dad, we need to talk," Amy said, her voice shaking with suppressed emotion. Derek nodded toward a private conference room where they could speak without media attention. Once inside, Amy and Tyler faced their father with expressions that reminded Derek uncomfortably of Linda's manipulation tactics. "We know Mom did wrong things," Tyler began carefully. "But she's still our mother, and she doesn't deserve to spend the rest of her life in prison." Derek studied his son's face, recognizing Linda's coaching in the boy's words. "Tyler, your mother committed treason and used you and Amy as intelligence assets. What punishment do you think would be appropriate? Something that gives her a chance to make up for what she did?" Amy interjected. "Maybe house arrest or community service. Something that doesn't destroy our family completely." Derek realized that Linda's final manipulation was reaching fruition. Even from prison, she had convinced the twins that their father was the real villain for refusing to forgive her betrayal. "Amy, your mother sold classified information to foreign agents," Derek explained patiently. "She endangered military operations and used both of you as weapons against your own father. Those actions have consequences that go far beyond family dynamics. But you trapped her." Amy's control finally broke. "You set up this whole elaborate scheme to destroy her instead of trying to save your marriage." Derek looked at his daughter with the same cold assessment he had once reserved for enemy combatants. "Amy, would you have preferred that I allowed your mother to continue committing treason? I would have preferred that you acted like a husband and father instead of a military machine." Amy shouted. "Mom made mistakes, but you made choices that destroyed our family." Tyler stepped forward, supporting his sister's position. "Dad, we've decided to testify at Mom's sentencing hearing. We're going to ask the judge for leniency and explain how much our family needs her." Derek felt something cold and final settle in his chest as he realized that Linda's manipulation had been completely successful. His own children had chosen their traitorous mother over their loyal father, just as Linda had planned. "I see," Derek said quietly. "And if I asked you not to testify for your mother's leniency?" "We'd testify anyway," Amy replied defiantly. "This is bigger than your need for revenge, Dad." Derek nodded slowly, making a decision that would define the rest of their relationships. "Then you've made your choice. Both of you." "What do you mean?" Tyler asked, sensing the finality in his father's tone. Derek looked at his children one last time, seeing Linda's manipulation in their eyes and understanding that they were no longer truly his family. "I mean that you've chosen to support a traitor over your father. That choice has consequences too." As Derek walked away from his children, he felt the last vestiges of his old life crumble into dust. Linda had succeeded in her final manipulation. She had turned his own children into enemies. But Derek had learned long ago that sometimes victory required the complete destruction of everything that could be used against you. The twins would soon discover that their father's capacity for ruthless action extended even to his own blood when they chose to betray him. Chapter 6. The Point of No Return. 2 weeks later, Derek sat in the sentencing hearing as Amy and Tyler prepared to make their victim impact statements on behalf of their mother. Linda's attorney had coached them carefully, framing their testimony as a plea for family reunification rather than simple mercy for a traitor. Judge Patricia Hawthorne had a reputation for harsh sentences in national security cases, but she also considered family impact in her decisions. Derek knew that the twins' testimony could potentially reduce Linda's sentence, giving her hope for eventual reconciliation with her children. Amy approached the podium first, wearing a conservative blue dress that made her look younger than her 16 years. Derek watched his daughter with the same detached assessment he had once applied to enemy assets, cataloging her words and gestures for future reference. "Your Honor, I know my mother made terrible mistakes," Amy began, her voice carefully modulated to project both remorse and hope. But she's still the person who raised me, who taught me right from wrong, who was there for every soccer game and school play. Derek noted how Amy avoided mentioning the specific crimes Linda had committed, instead focusing on emotional appeals that minimized the severity of treason. Linda's coaching was evident in every carefully chosen word. "My brother and I need our mother," Amy continued, tears beginning to flow. "We understand that she has to be punished, but please don't take her away from us forever. We believe she can learn from her mistakes and become the mother we remember again." Judge Hawthorne listened impassively as Amy concluded her statement and returned to her seat. Tyler then approached the podium, his hands shaking as he began to speak. "Your Honor, my family used to be happy," Tyler said, his voice cracking with emotion. "My parents loved each other, and Amy and I felt safe and supported. I know my mom did wrong things, but I also know that my dad could have handled this differently." Derek's expression hardened as Tyler continued. "Instead of trying to save his marriage or help my mother get counseling, my father set up this trap that destroyed our whole family. My mom needs a chance to make up for her mistakes, not spend the rest of her life in prison." The courtroom was silent as Tyler finished and returned to his seat. Derek could see Linda's satisfied expression as she realized her manipulation had succeeded in turning their children against him publicly and permanently. When Judge Hawthorne asked if anyone else wished to speak before sentencing, Derek stood and approached the podium. The twins looked surprised, as Derek had previously indicated he would not make a statement. "Your Honor, I've listened to my children's pleas for mercy regarding their mother," Derek began, his voice carrying the authority of 20 years of military command. "I want to address their statements directly." Judge Hawthorne nodded for him to continue. "Amy and Tyler have asked you to show mercy to a woman who committed treason against their own country," Derek continued, his gaze shifting to his children. "They've asked you to consider family reunification with a person who used them as intelligence assets against their father." Derek's voice grew colder as he continued. "Your Honor, Linda Morrison didn't just betray her marriage vows or compromise national security. She systematically manipulated our children into becoming unwitting participants in her treasonous activities. She coached them to extract classified information from their father while making them believe they were protecting the family." Amy and Tyler stared at their father in shock as Derek continued his statement. "The evidence shows that Linda Morrison planned to abandon these children when her operation was discovered. She arranged false identification and escape routes that made no provision for Amy and Tyler's safety or well-being. She was prepared to leave them behind to face the consequences of her betrayal." Derek turned to face his children directly. "Amy, Tyler, your mother's final manipulation was convincing you that I am the villain in this story. She has succeeded in turning you against your father in favor of a traitor who was prepared to abandon you when it served her purposes." The twins' faces showed confusion and growing anger as Derek exposed Linda's manipulation publicly. "Your Honor, I respectfully request that Linda Morrison receive the maximum sentence allowable by law," Derek concluded. "Treason demands the harshest possible consequences, regardless of family considerations that are built on lies and manipulation." As Derek returned to his seat, he could feel the hatred radiating from Amy and Tyler. Linda's manipulation had been so complete that they now saw their father's pursuit of justice as pure cruelty. Judge Hawthorne deliberated for 30 minutes before returning to pronounce sentence. "Linda Morrison, you have been convicted of treason against the United States of America. Your actions endangered national security, compromised military operations, and caused immeasurable damage to your own family." Linda stood to receive her sentence, her face showing desperate hope that the twins' testimony had influenced the judge's decision. "The court sentences you to 25 years imprisonment in federal prison, with no possibility of parole for 15 years. Additionally, you are permanently stripped of all military benefits and honors, and you forfeit all rights to contact with classified government personnel." Linda collapsed as the sentence was pronounced, her dreams of eventual reconciliation with her children destroyed by the harsh reality of justice. Amy and Tyler looked stunned, having believed their testimony would result in a more lenient sentence. As the bailiffs led Linda away in handcuffs, she looked desperately toward Derek one final time. "Derek, please don't let my mistakes destroy the children's future. They need their father, even if they can't see it right now." Derek met her gaze with the same cold indifference he had shown enemy combatants. You destroyed their future when you decided to use them as weapons against their father. I won't make the same mistake you did. I won't pretend that betrayal can be forgiven or forgotten. After the hearing, Amy and Tyler confronted Derek in the courthouse parking lot. Both twins were crying, their faces showing a mixture of grief and rage that reminded Derek uncomfortably of Linda's emotional manipulations. How could you do that to her? Amy screamed. She's our mother, and you just made sure she'll never come home. Derek studied his daughter's face, seeing Linda's features twisted with the same manipulative anger he had learned to recognize and despise. Amy, your mother committed treason. The sentence reflects the severity of her crimes, not my desire for revenge. You could have asked for mercy, Tyler accused. You could have supported us instead of making sure she got the maximum sentence. Derek realized that the twins would never understand that their mother's crimes went far beyond simple marital betrayal. Linda's manipulation had been so complete that they now saw justice as cruelty and loyalty as vengeful obsession. Tyler, Amy, you've made your choice to support a traitor over your father, Derek said with finality. That choice has consequences that extend beyond this sentencing hearing. What do you mean? Amy demanded. Derek looked at his children one last time, seeing them not as his beloved twins, but as extensions of Linda's betrayal. I mean that you've chosen your side in this war. You've publicly supported someone who committed treason and used you as weapons against your father. You've made it clear that family loyalty means nothing to you when it conflicts with what you want. Dad, we're still your children, Tyler said desperately, beginning to sense the finality in his father's words. No, Derek replied coldly. You're Linda's children. You've chosen to be her legacy rather than mine. Live with that choice. As Derek walked away from Amy and Tyler for the final time, he felt the last traces of his old identity disappear. The loving father and devoted husband were gone, replaced by something harder and more ruthless. The twins had chosen their traitor mother over their loyal father, and Derek would never forgive that betrayal. Linda had succeeded in her final manipulation, but the victory would prove to be hollow. Derek's capacity for ruthless action had no limits when it came to people who betrayed him, and that now included his own children. The war was finally over, but Derek had won by destroying everything that had once mattered to him. In pursuing total victory, he had become something that even his enemies would fear. Chapter 7. Scorched Earth. 6 months after Linda's sentencing, Derek sat in his newly sparse study, having removed all family photographs and mementos of his previous life. The house on Magnolia Drive had been emptied of everything that reminded him of the betrayals he had endured. Amy and Tyler lived with Linda's sister Rebecca in North Carolina, having been removed from Derek's custody through a carefully orchestrated legal campaign. Derek's lawyer, Samuel Wright, sat across from him reviewing the final custody paperwork. The twins had petitioned the court for emancipation and alternative guardianship, claiming their father was emotionally abusive and mentally unstable following their mother's imprisonment. Derek, the judge bought their argument that you've become unstable since Linda's arrest, Sam explained grimly. The psychological evaluation they requested portrayed you as cold, calculating, and unable to maintain healthy emotional relationships. Derek's expression remained impassive as he studied the documents. And my counter-evaluation shows you're competent but emotionally detached. The court psychiatrist described you as functionally ruthless in your approach to personal relationships. It doesn't help that you refuse to attend family counseling or show any desire for reconciliation with the twins. Derek poured himself a glass of bourbon, noting the irony that his tactical approach to personal betrayal had been turned against him in family court. Sam, the twins chose to support a traitor over their father. They publicly testified for leniency for someone who used them as intelligence assets. What kind of reconciliation is possible after that level of betrayal? The kind that might have preserved your relationship with your children, Sam replied carefully. Derek, I've known you for 20 years. This level of cold calculation isn't healthy, even for someone who's been betrayed as completely as you have. Derek smiled without warmth. Sam, I learned a long time ago that mercy is a luxury that gets people killed. Linda exploited my love and trust to commit treason. The twins exploited our family relationship to support her betrayal. I won't make the mistake of showing mercy to people who have proven they'll use it against me. Sam reviewed the custody agreement one final time. So you're really going to let them go? No visitation, no contact, no attempt to rebuild the relationship. I'm letting them live with the consequences of their choices, Derek corrected. They wanted to be Linda's children instead of mine. Now they can discover what that actually means. Over the following weeks, Derek methodically eliminated every trace of his former family from his life. He sold the house on Magnolia Drive and moved into a Stark apartment near the base. Family photographs were destroyed, personal mementos were discarded, and Amy and Tyler's belongings were shipped to their aunt's house without comment. But Derek's revenge against Linda and Blake was far from complete. From his new apartment, he continued monitoring their situations and systematically destroying any possibility of redemption or recovery. Blake Hoffman had been sentenced to 20 years in federal prison, but Derek ensured that his time would be particularly difficult. Through connections in the federal prison system, Derek arranged for Blake to be housed with inmates who had specific grievances against military officers who betrayed their oath. Blake's having a rough time in federal prison, Major Riggs reported during one of their monthly security briefings. Multiple incidents with other inmates, frequent trips to solitary confinement. Word is that someone with connections has made sure the other prisoners know exactly what he did. Derek nodded with satisfaction. Blake chose to seduce military wives and commit treason. Now he gets to live with men who understand the value of loyalty and the consequences of betrayal. Derek also used his intelligence connections to monitor Linda's situation. Federal prison proved to be a harsh environment for someone accustomed to the privileges of military family life. Linda's attempts to maintain contact with Amy and Tyler were systematically blocked through Derek's manipulation of prison communication policies. Linda's been trying to send letters to the twins, Derek's contact at the Federal Corrections System reported. All mail is being reviewed for security purposes, and we found several communications that could be considered attempts to continue her manipulation of the children. Continue blocking all contact, Derek instructed. Linda used those children as weapons against their father. She doesn't get to maintain influence over them from prison. But Derek's most ruthless action was his systematic destruction of any support system the twins might have relied upon. Rebecca, Linda's sister, had taken custody of Amy and Tyler out of family obligation, but Derek's investigation revealed vulnerabilities that could be exploited. Rebecca's financial situation was precarious, supported largely by alimony from her 3 failed marriages. Derek used his military connections to ensure that her ex-husband's military retirement benefits were audited for irregularities, resulting in significant reductions to her support payments. More devastatingly, Derek arranged for Rebecca's employer to become aware of her family connection to a convicted traitor. The defense contracting company where Rebecca worked as an administrative assistant couldn't risk the security implications of employing someone with direct family ties to a treason case. Rebecca Chun was terminated from her position yesterday, Derek's private investigator reported. Officially for budget reasons, but the security concerns made her position untenable. Derek felt no satisfaction in destroying Rebecca's life, but he understood that the twins needed to experience the full consequences of supporting their mother's betrayal. Comfort and stability were luxuries that betrayers didn't deserve. Within 3 months, Rebecca could no longer afford to support Amy and Tyler. The twins found themselves in state foster care, their comfortable middle-class lifestyle replaced by the harsh realities of institutional care. Derek monitored their situation through social services contacts, ensuring that they understood the connection between their choices and their circumstances. Amy and Tyler attempted to contact Derek through multiple channels, their messages becoming increasingly desperate as their situation deteriorated. But Derek had blocked all communication, having decided that the twins were extensions of Linda's betrayal rather than victims deserving of mercy. "Dad, please help us." Amy's voicemail pleaded from a block number. "Aunt Rebecca can't take care of us anymore, and we're going to be split up into different foster homes. We know you're angry, but we're still your children." Derek listened to the message once before deleting it permanently. Amy and Tyler had chosen to be Linda's children when they testified for her leniency. Now they could experience the full consequences of that choice without his intervention. Tyler's messages were more direct. "Dad, I know we hurt you, but we were just kids trying to keep our family together. Amy's been crying every night, and I don't know how to protect her anymore. Please don't abandon us like Mom did." Derek's expression remained impassive as he deleted Tyler's desperate pleas. The boy had finally understood that Linda's plan had always been to abandon them, but the realization came too late to earn Derek's mercy. The twins' destruction was systematic and complete. They were separated into different foster homes, their academic performance suffered, and their future prospects dimmed considerably. Amy, once destined for a prestigious college on Derek's military benefits, now faced the reality of aging out of foster care with limited resources. Tyler, who had dreamed of following his father into military service, discovered that his family's treason conviction made him ineligible for security clearances necessary for most military occupations. Derek received periodic reports on their deteriorating circumstances, but felt no inclination to intervene. The twins had chosen their side in the war between loyalty and betrayal, and Derek's mercy had been permanently exhausted. As autumn arrived, Derek sat in his sparse apartment reviewing intelligence reports from overseas deployments. His professional life remained exemplary, his reputation for ruthless efficiency having grown rather than diminished following his family's destruction. But late at night, when the operational reports were filed and the base was quiet, Derek sometimes wondered if his total victory had been worth the price. He had destroyed everyone who betrayed him, but in doing so, he had also destroyed everything he had once fought to protect. The man who had once been a devoted husband and loving father was gone, replaced by something harder and more dangerous. Derek had won his war through the complete annihilation of his enemies, but the victory felt as cold and empty as the apartment where he now lived alone. Still, when he received word that Linda had been hospitalized after a prison assault, Derek felt only satisfaction. When Blake was stabbed by fellow inmates and barely survived, Derek's only regret was that the attack hadn't been fatal. And when he learned that Amy had attempted suicide in foster care while Tyler had been arrested for theft, Derek registered the information with the same detachment he showed for enemy casualty reports. The war was over, and Derek had achieved total victory. But in destroying his enemies so completely, he had also destroyed any possibility of redemption or forgiveness for them or for himself. Chapter 8. The Final Gambit. 2 years after Linda's sentencing, Derek had transformed into something his former self wouldn't have recognized. Now a brigadier general following his promotion for exceptional service in counterintelligence, he commanded respect and fear in equal measure throughout the military hierarchy. His reputation for ruthless efficiency had made him indispensable to operations requiring absolute loyalty and unwavering commitment. Derek's apartment remained as stark as a military barracks, containing only the essentials necessary for survival and work. He had eliminated every personal connection that could be used against him, living an existence of pure tactical efficiency. But even Derek's carefully controlled environment couldn't completely insulate him from the consequences of his scorched earth approach to betrayal. Major Riggs visited Derek's apartment on a cold February evening, carrying intelligence reports that would force Derek to confront the final phase of his war against everyone who had betrayed him. Tony looked older than his years, the stress of monitoring Derek's increasingly ruthless actions having taken a visible toll. "Stone, we need to discuss some developments in the Morrison case," Tony said, settling into one of Derek's 2 chairs. "Linda's situation has changed significantly." Derek looked up from the tactical manual he'd been reviewing. "How so?" "She's been diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The prison medical staff estimates she has 6 months to live, possibly less." Tony paused, studying Derek's impassive expression. "Her attorney is petitioning for compassionate release so she can spend her final months with the twins." Derek's expression didn't change as he processed this information. "And the twins' current status?" "Amy aged out of foster care last month. She's working minimum wage jobs and living in a boarding house. Tyler is still in state custody, but he'll age out in 6 months. Both kids have been trying to maintain contact with their mother through prison correspondence." Derek stood and moved to the window, looking out at the base housing where military families live their comfortable, secure lives. "Tony, what's your assessment of Linda's motivations for this petition?" "Honestly, I think she's genuinely dying and wants to see her children before she goes. But I also think she's planning one final manipulation, trying to use her death to reconcile the twins with their father and secure their future." Derek turned back to his friend, his expression showing the cold calculation that had become his default mode. She wants to play the dying mother card to manipulate me into showing mercy. Stone, the twins are barely surviving out there. Amy's struggling with depression and financial instability. Tyler's been in 3 different foster homes in the past year. Linda's death might be an opportunity to rebuild something with your children. Derek smiled with the same warmth he might show an enemy combatant. Tony, those aren't my children anymore. They chose to be Linda's legacy when they testified for her leniency. Now they can live with that choice until the end. But Tony had one more piece of intelligence that would test Derek's resolve. Stone, there's something else you need to know. Amy's pregnant. Derek's expression flickered for the first time in months. Explain. She's 6 months along. The father is some lowlife who abandoned her when he found out. She's been trying to work while pregnant, living in basically poverty conditions. The kid's going to be born into the same system that failed Amy and Tyler. Derek absorbed this information with the same tactical assessment he applied to enemy threats. His daughter was about to bring a child into the world under circumstances that would likely result in generational poverty and instability. Has she attempted to contact me regarding her situation? Multiple times. Her messages have become increasingly desperate as her due date approaches. She specifically asked for help with medical expenses and housing. Derek moved to his desk and pulled out a secure phone he used for operational communications. Tony, I want you to arrange a meeting with Linda's attorney. I'm going to visit her in the hospital. Derek, what are you planning? Derek's smile was colder than anything Tony had seen from him, even during their most ruthless operations overseas. I'm going to give Linda exactly what she's always deserved. The truth about what her choices have cost everyone she claimed to love. 3 days later, Derek sat in the hospital room where Linda lay dying. Cancer had ravaged her body, leaving her a skeletal shadow of the woman who had once been his anchor and inspiration. But her eyes still held the intelligence and manipulative cunning that had made her such an effective traitor. Derek, Linda whispered, attempting to project the same vulnerability she had used during her trial. Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would. Derek studied his dying wife with clinical detachment. Linda, you have something you want to say? Say it. I want to ask you to forgive Amy and Tyler. They were children when all this happened, and they were trying to keep our family together the only way they knew how. They don't deserve to suffer for my mistakes. Derek leaned back in his chair, his expression unchanging. Linda, your children testified for leniency for a traitor who had used them as intelligence assets. They chose you over their father even after learning the full scope of your betrayal. Those weren't the actions of manipulated children. They were the actions of people who share your fundamental lack of loyalty. Linda's composure began to crack as she realized Derek's mercy remained unavailable even on her deathbed. Derek, Amy's pregnant and homeless. Tyler's going to age out of foster care with no support system. I'm begging you to help them, not for my sake, but for the sake of the grandchild you're about to have. Derek's expression showed the first flicker of emotion since entering the room. You mean the grandchild that will be born into poverty because his mother chose to support a traitor instead of maintaining a relationship with her father? That grandchild. Please, Derek. I'm dying. Don't let my mistakes destroy another generation of our family. Derek stood to leave, but paused at the foot of Linda's bed. Linda, you want to know what your choices have cost? Amy is homeless and pregnant, working minimum wage jobs while trying to survive on the streets. Tyler has been bounced between foster homes and will age out of the system with no resources or support. Both of them have struggled with depression, academic failure, and social isolation. Linda's face showed growing horror as Derek continued his assessment. But most importantly, they've learned the same lesson you taught them, that loyalty is optional and betrayal can be justified if it serves your immediate interests. Amy chose an abusive boyfriend over stability because she learned from you that love means accepting betrayal. Tyler has been arrested multiple times because he learned from you that rules only apply when they're convenient. Derek's voice dropped to the quiet intensity that had preceded his most ruthless military operations. Your children aren't victims of my lack of mercy, Linda. They're victims of your betrayal, and they're perpetuating the cycle you started. That's your legacy. As Derek walked toward the door, Linda called after him desperately. Derek, what about the grandchild? That baby is innocent of everything that's happened between us. Derek stopped at the door and turned back one final time. The baby will be raised by people who chose betrayal over loyalty. It will learn the same lessons Amy and Tyler learned from you. That's not my responsibility. It's the natural consequence of the choices your family made. Derek left the hospital knowing he would never see Linda alive again. She died 3 weeks later, alone and unvisited by her children, who couldn't afford the travel expenses to reach her bedside. Derek felt no satisfaction in her death, only the cold completion of a tactical objective. But Linda's death created one final opportunity for manipulation. Her attorney contacted Derek about a letter Linda had written to be delivered to Amy and Tyler after her death. The letter contained a final plea for the twins to reconcile with their father and seek his forgiveness for their betrayal. Derek intercepted the letter through his intelligence contacts and read Linda's final manipulation. Even in death, she was trying to use guilt and emotional manipulation to achieve what she couldn't accomplish in life, forcing Derek to show mercy to people who had betrayed him. Derek burned the letter without delivering it to Amy and Tyler. Linda's final words of wisdom would die with her, leaving her children to face the consequences of their choices without the benefit of her deathbed absolution. As autumn approached, Derek received intelligence reports that Amy had given birth to a daughter in a county hospital, with no family present and no support system available. Tyler had aged out of foster care and was struggling with homelessness and unemployment. But Derek felt no inclination to intervene. The twins had chosen their path when they testified for their traitorous mother's leniency. Now they could raise the next generation with the same lack of resources and stability their choices had earned them. Derek's war was finally complete. Everyone who had betrayed him was dead, destroyed, or living with the full consequences of their disloyalty. He had achieved total victory through the complete annihilation of his enemies, leaving no possibility for mercy, forgiveness, or redemption. But in his moment of absolute triumph, Derek began to understand the true cost of his scorched earth approach to betrayal. He had won the war by becoming something that even his enemies would fear, but in doing so, he had also destroyed any possibility of peace or contentment. Chapter 9. The Pyrrhic Victory. 5 years after Linda's death, Brigadier General Derek Morrison commanded the respect and fear of everyone who served under him. His reputation for tactical brilliance and ruthless efficiency had made him legendary throughout the military intelligence community. But the man who had once fought to protect his family now lived in a world he had systematically stripped of every human connection. Derek's office at the Pentagon reflected the same stark efficiency as his personal life. Maps, operational charts, and commendations covering the walls, but no photographs or personal mementos. His subordinates approached him with the cautious respect normally reserved for unexploded ordnances, understanding that his competence was matched only by his capacity for destruction. On a gray December morning, Major General Patricia Crawford entered Derek's office carrying a file that would force him to confront the ultimate consequences of his war against betrayal. Crawford was the daughter of Derek's former mentor, and one of the few people who remembered the man Derek had been before his family's destruction. "Derek, I have some intelligence you need to review," Crawford said, settling into the chair across from his desk. "It concerns your former family." Derek looked up from the tactical assessment he'd been reviewing, his expression showing the same cold attention he gave all operational briefings. "Proceed." Crawford opened the file and extracted several surveillance photographs. Amy Morrison, now 23, has been involved with a domestic extremist group operating out of Richmond. Our counterterrorism division has been monitoring the organization for possible threats to military installations. Derek studied the photographs, seeing his daughter among a group of anti-government protesters. Amy looked older than her years, her face showing the hardness that came from struggling to survive without resources or support. The child in the photos appeared to be around 4 years old, Derek's granddaughter, whom he had never met. "What's the nature of the group's activities?" "They're planning protests against military recruitment centers, specifically targeting installations where families have been affected by what they call military oppression." Amy has been identified as a key organizer, using her family's story as a recruitment tool. Crawford handed Derek a transcript of one of Amy's speeches to the group. Derek read his daughter's words with the same detachment he showed enemy communications intercepts. "My father destroyed our family in the name of national security," Amy had told the crowd. He used his military connections to crush anyone who opposed him, including his own children. The military system protects officers like him while destroying the families they claim to serve. Derek set down the transcript, understanding that Amy had weaponized her victimhood in the same way Linda had weaponized their marriage. And Tyler Morrison has been arrested multiple times for theft and assault. He's currently serving a 2-year sentence in state prison. Intelligence suggests he's been recruiting inmates for anti-military activities upon their release. Crawford paused, studying Derek's impassive expression. Derek, both of your children have become exactly what you fought against: threats to military security and stability. They're using their personal grievances to justify actions that could endanger military personnel and their families. Derek absorbed this information with tactical precision, understanding that his scorched earth approach had created the very enemies he had sought to eliminate. By destroying Amy and Tyler completely, he had given them nothing left to lose and powerful motivation for revenge. What's the recommended response? Counterintelligence is considering surveillance and possible infiltration of Amy's group. Tyler will be monitored upon his release. Both represent ongoing security risks that require management. Derek realized that his war against betrayal had come full circle. His own children were now classified as domestic threats requiring military surveillance, their hatred for their father having evolved into hatred for everything he represented. Patricia, I want to review all intelligence on both targets personally. This is now a priority assignment for my division. Crawford hesitated, understanding the implications of Derek taking personal responsibility for surveillance of his own children. Derek, you're talking about monitoring your own family as enemy combatants. I'm talking about managing domestic threats to military security, Derek corrected coldly. The fact that those threats happen to be my former children is irrelevant to the operational requirements. Over the following months, Derek methodically studied intelligence reports on Amy and Tyler's activities. His daughter had become an effective organizer, using her personal story to recruit military families who felt betrayed by the system. Her speeches painted Derek as a symbol of military authority unchecked by human compassion or family loyalty. Tyler's prison correspondence revealed a more direct approach to revenge. He had been planning attacks on military recruitment centers and family housing areas, specifically targeting installations where Derek had served. His hatred for his father had metastasized into a broader desire to cause pain to military families. Derek recognized his own tactical thinking in his children's planning. They had learned strategic patience, operational security, and the importance of building networks of support for long-term campaigns. In destroying them, he had also trained them to become more effective enemies. But the most devastating intelligence came from Amy's personal communications, intercepted through surveillance of her anti-military group. Derek read his daughter's letters to her own daughter with the same clinical attention he gave terrorist communications. Your grandfather is a monster, Amy had written in a letter meant to be given to the child when she was older. He destroyed our family because he couldn't forgive human weakness. He chose his reputation over his children, and he's never shown any remorse for the lives he's ruined. Derek realized that Amy was poisoning the next generation against him, just as Linda had poisoned Amy and Tyler. His granddaughter would grow up hating a grandfather she had never met, learning to see him as a symbol of everything wrong with military authority and family loyalty. The cycle was continuing, but now Derek was cast as the villain in his own family's mythology. On a cold February evening, Derek sat in his Pentagon office reviewing the final intelligence assessment on his children's threat level. Both Amy and Tyler had been classified as domestic security risks requiring ongoing surveillance and possible intervention. Derek understood that he had achieved exactly what he had sought: total victory over everyone who had betrayed him. Linda was dead, Blake was still in federal prison, and his children were living with the complete consequences of their choices. But in destroying his enemies so thoroughly, Derek had also created new threats that would require eternal vigilance to contain. His granddaughter would grow up in poverty, raised by a mother who saw Derek as a monster and taught to hate everything he represented. She would learn the same lessons about loyalty and betrayal that had destroyed 3 generations of the Morrison family. Derek had won his war through the complete annihilation of his enemies, but victory felt as cold and empty as the office where he now spent his nights alone. He had protected his reputation and demonstrated the consequences of betrayal. But in doing so, he had also ensured that the war would continue indefinitely. As Derek prepared to leave his office, he paused at the window overlooking the Pentagon's inner courtyard. Military families walked below, their children playing while parents discussed the day's activities. The scene reminded Derek of everything he had once fought to protect and everything he had ultimately destroyed. Derek's phone buzzed with a secure message from counterintelligence. Amy Morrison's group planning demonstration at Fort Braxton next month. Tyler Morrison scheduled for parole review. Recommend continued surveillance of both targets. Derek responded with the same cold efficiency he brought to all operational decisions. Approved. Maintain current monitoring protocols. Report any escalation in threat assessment immediately. But as Derek walked through the empty corridors of the Pentagon toward his car, he understood the true nature of his victory. He had become the most feared and respected intelligence officer in the military, having demonstrated that betrayal would be met with total destruction regardless of family relationships or emotional appeals. Yet in achieving that reputation, Derek had also ensured that he would spend the rest of his life monitoring his own children as domestic threats, watching his granddaughter grow up to hate him, and living with the knowledge that his pursuit of absolute loyalty had created the very disloyalty he had sought to eliminate. Derek Morrison had won his war against betrayal through the complete destruction of everyone who had opposed him. But as he drove home to his empty apartment, surrounded by the silence of total victory, he finally understood that some wars were won at too high a price, even for those who never forgave and never forgot. The last betrayal had been his own, and it was the one victory Derek would never be able to escape.